War is often understood through the lens of industrial might. The nation with the most tanks, the most soldiers, the most bullets wins. This is the simple, brutal arithmetic of conflict. And in the grand narrative of the Second World War, the Allied victory is frequently attributed to this overwhelming material superiority, an avalanche of steel and manpower that ground the Axis into submission. But what if this explanation, while true, is dangerously incomplete? What if one of the most decisive factors in the Allied victory, a weapon that saved tens of thousands of lives, wasn't forged in a factory, but imagined in an art studio? This is the story of a weapon that was invisible, ethereal, and devastatingly effective. It is the story of a unit that fought not with explosives, but with illusions. A unit of artists, designers, and sound engineers who were recruited to wage a war of the mind against the German High Command. They wielded inflatable tanks, sonic deception, and scripted performances to conjure phantom armies from thin air, manipulating the very perception of reality on the battlefield. This is the story of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, better known as the Ghost Army. And the mystery we will unravel is not simply what they did, but how their radical approach to warfare represented a profound psychological schism in the very nature of modern combat. We will explore how a doctrine of creativity, improvisation, and psychological manipulation triumphed over a rigid, industrialized, and ultimately predictable war machine. This isn't just a story of clever tricks. It is the story of a high-stakes theatrical production that fundamentally altered the course of the war. It's Hollywood versus Hitler. To understand the significance of the Ghost Army, we must first understand the two opposing philosophies of war that were locked in a death struggle in 1944. On one side, you have the German war machine, a testament to industrial logic and centralized command. It was a system built on meticulous planning, rigid hierarchies, and the perfection of the blitzkrieg, a doctrine of overwhelming, concentrated force. The German military was an intricate clockwork mechanism, each component precisely engineered for a specific, brutal purpose. On the other side, a new philosophy was emerging within the Allied command, born from a desperate need for an edge. It was a philosophy that valued ingenuity over sheer numbers, deception over direct confrontation. It was a doctrine that understood that the ultimate weapon was not a bomb, but an idea planted in the enemy's mind. The Ghost Army was the ultimate expression of this new doctrine. Officially activated on January 20, 1944, the roughly 1,100-man unit known as the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops was tasked with a unique mission: to deceive Hitler's forces about the size and location of Allied armies. They were to be masters of illusion, capable of impersonating two entire divisions, roughly 30,000 men. To achieve this, the army didn't recruit from the hardened ranks of infantrymen. Instead, they sought out artists, architects, actors, set designers, and engineers. Many were recruited from art schools and advertising agencies, their creative thinking prized above all else. This was a unit that was said to have one of the highest average IQs in the army. Among its ranks were future luminaries like fashion designer Bill Blass and minimalist painter Ellsworth Kelly. These were not soldiers in the traditional sense. They were, as one of the unit's creators, Ralph Ingersoll, called them, his con artists. Their arsenal was equally unconventional. They wielded inflatable rubber tanks, artillery, and airplanes that, from the air, were indistinguishable from the real thing. They used powerful speakers to blast the sounds of troop movements and construction, audible up to 15 miles away. They created phony radio networks with operators who could mimic the unique sending style of any Morse code operator, a feat previously thought impossible. And they engaged in theatrical performances, with soldiers impersonating generals and staff officers, driving through towns to be seen by enemy agents, and spreading misinformation in local cafes. This was a direct challenge to the German military mindset. The Wehrmacht, for all its tactical brilliance, was a system that relied on quantifiable data: troop numbers, tank counts, logistical capacity. The Ghost Army's mission was to corrupt that data at its source, to turn the German High Command's greatest strength, its meticulous intelligence gathering and analysis, into its greatest vulnerability. They were injecting chaos into a system that craved order.
To truly appreciate the Ghost Army's impact, we must shift our perspective to the other side of the front lines. Imagine you are a German intelligence officer in 1944. Your entire career has been built on a foundation of logic, observation, and a deep understanding of military doctrine. You know how an American armored division behaves. You know the radio traffic it generates, the logistical footprint it leaves, the sounds of its assembly. Your world is one of predictable patterns. Now, suddenly, those patterns begin to fracture. An entire American Army group, under the command of the fearsome General George S. Patton, appears to be massing in Kent, opposite the Pas-de-Calais. Your aerial reconnaissance confirms it. Endless rows of tanks, vast motor pools, sprawling encampments. Your radio intercepts pick up the chatter of thousands of soldiers preparing for an invasion. This is Operation Fortitude, the grand deception to mask the D-Day landings in Normandy, and the Ghost Army played a key role. The German High Command was predisposed to believe this illusion. The Pas-de-Calais was the most logical invasion point, the shortest route across the English Channel. The deception fed their existing biases, a crucial principle of psychological warfare. Allied double agents like Garbo reinforced this narrative, assuring their German handlers that the Normandy landings were merely a diversion. Even after D-Day, Hitler remained convinced that the main attack was still to come at Calais. He held the powerful 15th Army in reserve, waiting for an invasion that would never happen. This phantom army, conjured by the Ghost Army and other deception units, effectively paralyzed a significant portion of the German forces at the most critical moment of the war. We can only infer the growing confusion and paranoia within the German command. Reports would have been contradictory. A massive armored division detected one day would vanish the next, only to reappear miles away. The sounds of a major river crossing would echo through the night, but dawn would reveal no bridge, no soldiers. Consider the psychological toll of such uncertainty. War is a terrifying endeavor, but it is made manageable by a degree of predictability. You know your enemy's capabilities. You anticipate his moves. But how do you fight an enemy that seems to defy the laws of physics? An army that is everywhere and nowhere at once. The Ghost Army wasn't just deceiving the Germans. They were driving them crazy, as one of its members, Seymour Nussenbaum, later recalled. This was not a peripheral sideshow. In over 20 large-scale deceptions, from Normandy to the Rhine, the Ghost Army consistently manipulated German strategy. In Operation Brittany, they convinced the Germans of a different line of attack for General Patton's army. During the Battle of the Bulge, they used their illusions to help plug gaps in the American lines and confuse the German offensive. They were a constant, unsettling presence, a phantom menace that eroded the confidence and clarity of the German war machine. So how did this theatrical troupe of soldiers pull off such a grand deception? Their success lay in a multi-layered approach, a symphony of illusions designed to appeal to every one of the enemy's senses and intelligence-gathering methods. It was a process of masterful improvisation, as one historian put it, with creativity as their most important tool. It began with visual deception, handled by the 603rd Camouflage Engineering Battalion. These were the artists and designers who could create a convincing illusion of a massive military presence. Their primary tool was the inflatable decoy. Imagine a 93-pound rubber tank that, when inflated, looked exactly like a 32-ton M4 Sherman from the air. Teams of men could create an entire phantom armored division in a matter of hours. They would even use tractors to create fake tank tracks, adding another layer of authenticity. They created elaborate fake headquarters, complete with dummy soldiers and forged documents, all designed to be seen by enemy reconnaissance planes. But visual deception was only the first act. The second was sonic deception, orchestrated by the 3132 Signal Service Company Special. Working with engineers from Bell Labs, the unit had recorded a library of sounds of war onto state-of-the-art records. These weren't just generic noises. They were specific soundscapes. The rumble of a column of tanks, the clatter of bridge construction, the shouts and conversations of soldiers. These sounds were then blasted from powerful speakers mounted on trucks, with the volume carefully modulated to create the illusion of distance and movement. An entire armored division could be convincingly simulated moving into position under the cover of darkness, all with just a few trucks and a turntable. The third and perhaps most sophisticated layer was radio deception, or spoof radio as they called it. The signal company knew that German intelligence relied heavily on intercepting radio traffic to track Allied units. So they created a phantom network. Their operators would impersonate the radio operators of real units that had secretly moved out, mimicking their individual Morse code fists or sending styles to perfection. This convinced the Germans that a unit was still in its old position, while the real soldiers were miles away, preparing for an attack. The final element was what the unit called atmosphere. This was pure theater. Soldiers from the Ghost Army would be given the insignia of the unit they were impersonating and sent in to nearby towns. They would drive jeeps with the correct bumper markings, hang out in cafes, and deliberately let slip false information about their unit's plans, knowing that German spies or sympathizers were likely listening. This human element made the illusion complete, transforming it from a collection of props into a living, breathing deception. In stark contrast, consider the war on the Eastern Front. There, the conflict was a meat grinder of staggering proportions, a war of attrition defined by massive armies and brutal head-on collisions. There was little room for the subtlety and artistry employed by the Ghost Army. The uniqueness of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops was that they fought a different kind of war. While their comrades were fighting a war of annihilation, the Ghost Army was fighting a war of the mind, saving lives not by taking them, but by deceiving the enemy into making catastrophic mistakes.
The psychological climax of this story is not a single battle, but a moment of dawning realization for the German High Command. It is the moment when the rigid logic of their military doctrine was shattered by the new reality of psychological warfare. Perhaps the clearest example of this climax came in March 1945, during Operation Viersen. The Allies were preparing to cross the Rhine River, the last major natural barrier to entering Germany. The U.S. Ninth Army was tasked with a major crossing, and the Ghost Army was called in to create a diversion. Their mission was to simulate two entire divisions, the 30th and 79th Infantry, preparing to cross the Rhine at a location miles away from the actual crossing point. For days, the men of the Ghost Army put on their greatest performance. They deployed their fleet of inflatable tanks and artillery, broadcast the sounds of a massive military buildup around the clock, and filled the airwaves with false radio traffic. The German command took the bait completely. Convinced they were facing a force of tens of thousands of men, they repositioned their defenses, concentrating their artillery and troops on the Phantom Army. German artillery rained down on the empty fields occupied by rubber tanks and loudspeakers. And then, while the Germans were fixated on the illusion, the real Ninth Army crossed the Rhine against minimal resistance, suffering an astonishingly low number of casualties. The deception was a stunning success. Imagine the German commander in that sector in the aftermath. The reports would have been utterly bewildering. An entire American army, which he had observed with his own eyes and ears, had simply vanished. In its place was nothing but deflated rubber, shell craters and empty fields, and the lingering echoes of a phantom force. This was the moment of psychological collapse. It was the realization that the war was no longer being fought on a predictable physical battlefield. It was a moment when the clockwork precision of the German war machine was revealed to be tragically, fatally outmatched by an enemy who refused to play by the rules. The old world view, where victory was a matter of steel and numbers, was shattered. The legacy of the Ghost Army is profound. Military estimates suggest they saved the lives of between 15,000 and 30,000 American soldiers. Their story remained classified for over 50 years after the war, their exploits a closely guarded secret. But their innovative tactics in psychological and information operations became a blueprint for modern warfare. The big idea that this story teaches us is that in an age of industrial warfare, the most potent weapon can still be human creativity. The Ghost Army proved that imagination, artistry, and a deep understanding of human psychology can be as powerful as any artillery barrage. They demonstrated that the battlefield is not just a physical space, but a mental one, and the war for perception is as critical as the war for territory. They were the ultimate engineers of war, and their masterpieces were the illusions that saved thousands and helped win the war.